Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to this week's episode. We got UFC Fight Night Adesanya versus Pyfer in Seattle, Washington. Last week, decent week. Didn't really make any money because I feel like Lerone was partially robbed in that fight. I personally had it on my verdict scorecard, 47-47. One judge saw it that way. I thought two judges would see it that way. Only one. One of the judges gave Murphy round one, which was a round I think he won. I think he brought it to him the first two rounds, and then the last three rounds were Mavsar, but with the point deduction, a 47-47 was what I scored it. So was expecting to at least get money back last week, but did not end up being that way, and there's nothing you can do about it now but move on and try to make some money on this week's fight card. But aside from that, I think the only other ones that we missed on last week's card were Shamrock over Al-Sawadi and Curtis Campbell over Danny Silva, which was a bad read in retrospect. So kicking us off for UFC Seattle, we got Alexia Tainara versus Bruna Brazil. This is certainly an interesting fight. Alexia is actually, I think, one of the better up-and-coming women's MMA prospects right now in the UFC. She has solid finishing ability on a 5-fight win streak right now. 3 inside the UFC octagon, 2 inside the UFC octagon, 3 if you're counting the Contender Series. And two, one of those finishes, one of those was a finish win over Molly McCann by submission. Most recently, 5 months ago, took on Luma Lookboom and beat her by unanimous decision. She's taken on Bruna Brazil, who has been training with the Fighting Nerds. So she is in a better gym, at least being surrounded by better coaches, better athletes, hopefully getting better just advice going into her fights, because I think, her fight IQ, decision making has sort of been something that's burned her in the past. She's 2-3 in her last 5 fights. Pretty active fighter. Lost to Luma Lookboom, who Tainara is obviously coming off of a win against. Beat Molly McCann, so they both have that on their record. Lost to Wang Kong. Beat Shi Ming at the UFC, I want to say, Macau event or something like that. I forget where it was, but I know a lot of people were high on Shi Ming because of the head kick KO on the road to the UFC, but Bruna Brazil was able to walk her down, and then most recently had a pretty big step up in competition against Ketlin Souza, and she lost the fight unanimously. I think Alexia is somebody who's getting ready to break into the top 15, and I think this is sort of a good fight for her to potentially find a big finish win over, a women's fighter that the UFC is trying to build up in Bruna Brazil, I think. So I see Alexia probably getting a submission here, but I'll probably take a submission decision double chance if I bet on anything at all. So we're going to take that. We're going to move on up the card. We got Ricky Simón versus Adrian Yanez, which is such a good fight. Crazy for this to be second fight of the night, especially on a fight night card. But, being in Seattle, it makes sense. Ricky Simón is a Seattle native, a Washington native at least. I think he sort of reps Seattle. I can remember him fighting on the last UFC Seattle card and knocking out Habib Basharat. Pretty flatline KO. So leaning off that train, I'm going to have to lean with Ricky Simón here. Both these guys are 2-3 in their last 5. Simón's 2 wins are over Cameron Smotherman and Habib Basharat, with his 3 losses coming to most recently Raoni Barcelos, and before that Vinicius Oliveira and Mario Bautista, who are 2 super tricky ranked opponents at bantamweight right now. Whereas Yanez's last 2 wins are against Tony Kelly and Vinicius Salvador, with his losses coming to Daniel Marcos by split decision most recently, Jonathan Martinez by vicious leg kicks, one of the nastier fights I've ever seen. Jonathan Martinez just threw caution to the wind and absolutely must have broke both of Yanez's legs in that fight, and then was knocked out by Rob Font almost 3 years ago now. So it has been over a year since Yanez has been in the octagon by the time this fight happens, and I feel like that's also a pretty big reason as to why he's an underdog in this fight. I like Ricky Simón, everything about him. I think his striking's better than people make it out to be. He's obviously got the wrestling, the get-ups, the Brazilian jiu-jitsu. It's all good stuff. slightly smaller in this fight, inch shorter, an inch reach disadvantage. But fighting at home, his last time fighting in Seattle had one of his best performances of his entire career against, one of the, opponents that the UFC was trying to build up in Javi Basharat. So I'm going to lean with Ricky Simón here. I think, he could find the finish, but I don't think I'm going to dance too much with the finish props here, the decision props here, method of victory, I should say. And I'm just going to take the money line. If you can get him at minus 170, which we're going to double check the odds here, it's looking like, you actually can get him between minus 135 and minus 150 right now, which I think is great value for Ricky Simón. Definitely going to be a parlay piece later in the video. I like Ricky Simón a lot, and I'm definitely going to lean with him here. He's a little bit older, a little bit smaller, but I think he's fresher, fighting more top-level opponents, and fighting at home. I think he'll get a nice bounce-back win here. All right, so moving on. We got Navajo Sterling versus Bruno Lopez. Super fun one here. Navajo Sterling, 8-0 inside the UFC Octagon, 3-0 now, 4-0 if you count his Contender Series win. He has been unable to finish a fight inside the UFC Octagon now, despite being built like a brick shithouse, for lack of better words. This dude is an absolute Greek god. When you see him inside the Octagon, he looks massive. 3 decision wins against guys like Tuco Tokos, Ivan Arslan, and then Rodolfo Bellato, most recently in his last fight, who's actually coming off of a pretty nice knockout win against Luke Fernandez, a guy who I think, a lot of people thought was about to run through Bellato. And then he did win by knockout on the Contender Series a year and 6 months ago now, so pretty active guy, 3 fights inside the UFC Octagon in the past year. He's taken on Bruno Lopez, who was a guy that I actually thought could be solid inside the UFC, and then got absolutely starched by Dustin Jacoby in his last fight. And it just wasn't a good look for me, and it's definitely left a sour taste in my mouth. I think, Sterling, he's going to have a 5-inch reach advantage here, 2-inch height advantage. He's the younger fighter. He's on the win streak, got the undefeated record. Bruno Lopez probably going to have to throw caution to the wind here, considering, I think he's on I guess he's probably on a 4-fight UFC contract since he came through the Contender Series. And he's 1-1 inside the UFC. Beat Gadzia Sulov by decision. That was something that I thought, oh wow, this guy, could actually be solid. And then just left his chin up in the air against Dustin Jacoby, and I think if he does the same thing against Sterling could be sort of in the looks for his first UFC finish here. I wonder what the odds are going to be come close to fight time for a Navajo Sterling knockout. If you can get that at solid plus money, anywhere from plus 150 to plus 300 range, which is I think was probably right where it's going to be. I like it personally. I think it's probably a good prop here. He knows he's going to have to, start finishing some fights inside the UFC to start building up his name a little bit more, get thrown some more ranked opponents. And I think this is a perfect opportunity for him against a guy like Bruno Lopez who likes to leave his chin up in the air. So, has the size advantage, reach advantage, younger, city kickboxing guy, 8-0, 3-0 inside the UFC Octagon. Coming over from the Contender Series, I think Navajo Sterling's going to run through Bruno Lopez this week, and I like him a lot. Not a lot of value there on the money line, but definitely one of my favorite fighters on the card. Moving on up the card, Casey O'Neill versus Gabriela Fernandes. This is definitely something that I'm probably not going to spend too much time breaking down. Gabriela is 3-2 in her last 5 fights, all inside the UFC Octagon. Her wins, nice little 3-fight win streak here. Beat Storyalenko by unanimous decision. Beat Wang Kong by submission, which a lot of people talk about. I want to say she was like plus 900 in this fight or something crazy like that. And then split decision win over Carly Giudice, who's actually a pretty solid fighter, it's looking like now. So, beating Wang Kong, Carly Giudice, those are actually pretty solid wins in retrospect, looking back. Before that, had 2 losses to Teresa Bleda and Jasmine Jasudavicius. Casey O'Neill, on the other hand, also 3-2 in her last 5. She's only on a 1-fight streak here, though, with a unanimous decision win over Luana Santos. Before that, lost to Ariana Lipski da Silva and then Jennifer Maia. And then before that, had some wins over Roxanne Modafferi and Antonina Shevchenko. She's pretty inactive. Been almost 2 years since she's fought by the time this fight happens. And, since 4 years, 5 months, only 5 fights, about 5 a year. A little bit more than a fight per year. But she's going to have a little bit of a reach advantage. Both these women are 5'6". Casey O'Neill, solid stand-up. Gabrielle Fernandez, I think, more on the grappling side. So it's all how you sort of break down the value here. If you think this is going to be a grappling heavy fight, then I think Gabrielle will shake it out. If Casey's able to keep it on the feet, she should be able to shake it out on the scorecards. I think the best play here is for this fight to go to the decision. But, you're not going to get good value there. It's probably something crazy like minus 500 or higher, to be honest with you. I don't see either of them finishing the fight. I want to say, it's been 4 years, 5 months since the last finished win for Casey O'Neill. Fernandez does have a submission win over Wang Kong, but it's definitely an area where she was super needed a lot of work and definitely was pretty compromised in that position. So I feel like fight to go the distance here is best bet. I guess I'm going to lean with Gabrielle Fernandez just because, 3-fight win streak. 2 of those fights coming against fighters who I think are actually pretty solid. Whereas Casey O'Neill, she is younger, but hasn't really impressed me in the same way, especially in terms of, talent of opponent. So probably talked about that one for way too long. But moving on up the card, we've got Marcin Tybura versus Tyrell Fortune. This is going to be a fun one. Tyrell Fortune making his UFC debut, coming over from Bellator. I want to say, he was we're going to look at his record real quick. 17-3. Last couple fights were in promotions I haven't. LXF, something I've never really heard of. But before that, tons of fights at Bellator and in the PFL. I think Tyrell Fortune's pretty solid from the tape I've seen of him. And, Marcin Tybura, father time's sort of ticking on the clock there. Being a heavyweight, 40 years old, the chin is going to start to get compromised. I know Tyrell Fortune isn't necessarily young, as he's going to be 36 here in a couple months. But, once you hit that 39-40 range as a heavyweight, it's just really tough to stay in there unless, you're a guy like Poatan, who I think is going to be probably around for a couple years, but he's certainly an exception because of, just how physically daunting he is. But, I'm going to lead with Tyrell Fortune here. I think there's good value here at minus 120. We're going to double check the fight odds super fast. I think this is down on... did I scroll right past it? Yeah. Anywhere from minus 122 to minus 132 right now. I think that's good value. I feel like he's 4-1 in his last 5 fights. Granted, not a lot of these are against super high-level guys. His last loss was against Sergey Belosteny, who is pretty solid in the PFL at heavyweight, but on a 3-fight win streak, sort of outside of, bigger fight promotions. All 3 of those fights he's won by knockout. So I think that's good. At least a little bit of momentum and confidence going into this fight, coming off of 3 consecutive finish wins. He's taking on a guy in Tybura whose really only path to victory in this fight, I think, is being able to lay on top of Fortune and have, sort of a lot of ground control. I don't think Tybura really stands any finishing potential here unless he's able to catch him in something ridiculous like a leg lock or an E-bar, which has happened to Fortune in the past, but I don't see being a problem here in this fight. I'm gonna have to say Tyrell Fortune gets this one done by either knockout or by decision. Seems like a decent amount of people are on the side of Tybura, 73% on the side of Tybura, but I actually think Tyrell Fortune isn't bad. And this is, maybe a potential for him to break into the top 15 at UFC heavyweight, sort of right away with a big win in his UFC debut. So, Fortune, a little bit smaller, inch shorter, inch reach disadvantage. But he's got good wrestling. This dude was, a college wrestler. I want to say an All-American college wrestler. Has good get-ups, solid wrestling, which I think that's going to be Tybura's really only path to victory. We're be to grapple super heavy the entire time. And, Tyrell Fortune's a big guy, so I don't really see that being too much of an issue. I'm going to lean with Tyrell Fortune here. Seems like a lot of people are on the side of Tybura, so hopefully that means that the odds start to flip here closer to fight time. If I can get Fortune at underdog value day of the fight, I'll definitely be throwing a little bit of money on him. So moving on up the card, an interesting one for sure. Chase Hooper versus Lance Gibson Jr. This is a tad bit of a concerning fight. I like Chase Hooper. He was on a nice win streak. But I'm going to be honest with you, this dude lost me so much money in his last fight, it's not even funny. Talking hundreds of dollars, all sold because Chase Hooper got absolutely chinned by Alexander Hernandez, coming off of, what was a 4-fight win streak against guys like Jordan Levitt, Vyacheslav Borshev, Clay Guida, Jim Miller, and then 7 months ago got knocked out by Alexander Hernandez in a fight where I don't think he was really looking that bad. Sure, he got tagged a couple times on the feet in the first round, but he was just starting to get the wrestling going. Left his chin up on a takedown attempt and just got flatlined. He's taking on Lance Gibson Jr. here. This is a dude that I still just have no respect for. 3-2 in his last 5. Beat Bobby Green by split decision. Lost to Bobby Green by split decision. I think he lost that fight unanimously. I don't know how one judge saw it for him. Bobby Green didn't really do anything at all in that fight, but sort of an MVP Sam Patterson situation from this past weekend. And then before that, his last loss was to Vladimir Tokov on Bellator almost 3 years ago now by knockout. He does have a triangle choke win in his last 5 fights over Dominic Clark in Bellator. But then these 2 wins in the middle, this is where it gets a little concerning. A knockout win 1 year, 9 months ago over Chiron Spain, who is 19-42. 19-42. So definitely let that sit in. These are the type of guys that Lance Gibson Jr. was fighting to bounce back from a loss, to get himself inside the UFC octagon. 19-42 Chiron Spain. And then, a 5-2 submission win over a guy named RJ Hoyt. So, he's from British Columbia, Canada, so he's probably actually pretty close to Seattle. Now that I think about it, it's probably a big reason why he's fighting on this card. But Chase Hooper is the home fighter in this, being from Umanclaw, Washington, just a little bit down the road from Seattle. So, my official pick's gonna be Chase Hooper. Am I gonna bet on him? Absolutely not. Are the betting odds probably super inflated? Probably. They actually aren't as inflated as I would think they would be. Minus 250 to minus 280 for Chase Hooper. That's a bit alarming, in my opinion. He was on a nice win streak against decent guys. Yes, he was beating old dudes like Clay Guida and Jim Miller. But the Jordan Levitt win has actually aged pretty well, considering he looked like really solid against Yadir Daval. But yeah, coming off of a big loss where he got his chin checked pretty hard against a guy who probably has decent power. We haven't seen it inside the UFC octagon, but has a couple knockout wins on his record. It'll be interesting. I'm going to lean with Chase Hooper. Going to move on up the card. Ignacio Bahamondes versus Tafik Musayev, our featured prelim of the night. This is one that I'm not really going to think about too much. Bahamondes was a dude who a lot of people were incredibly high on before his last fight against Rafael Fiziev. It was a fight that he lost, but he looked solid in there against one of the best kickboxers in the UFC roster. Before that was on a 3-fight win streak. All 3 fights won by knockout. 2 fights by knockout, 1 by submission over Christos Giagos, Manuel Torres, which has aged incredibly, as this dude looks like he's just absolutely running through anybody and everybody right now. And then a submission win over Jalen Turner. His last loss before the Fiziev fight was to Ludovic Klein, who's a guy who I hold super highly. Had a good fight with Mateus Gamrot. Tafik Musayev, on the other hand, also coming off of a loss to Miktabek Oral by Kimura. Before that, 2 wins outside of the UFC at Risen against Koji Takada and Akira Okada. And then his last loss was inside Bellator before his past UFC loss to Alexander Shibili, and then beat Sidney Outlaw 3 or 7 months ago by knockout. So a couple fights at Bellator, a couple fights at Rizin for Tafik Masayev. His UFC debut didn't go well against a tough guy like Oralbai, but I think he's in for an almost even tougher opponent here in Ignacio Bahamondes. Bahamondes is an absolute animal. I know he trains at VFS Academy with Bilal Muhammad and a bunch of other guys in Chicago. So definitely actively works on the takedown defense quite a lot. And the kickboxing and the striking department, yeah, he's clearly got it. So I'm going to lean with Ignacio Bahamondes here. I do think the odds are a bit, inflated, a bit wide. I think Tafik Masayev is certainly a live dog. But, Bahamondes is a guy that, he's going to be 8 years younger here on fight night. And just going to be, I want to say, he's 6 inches taller, 6-inch reach advantage. Masayev is going to have a super, super strong grappling approach to win this fight. And I just don't see it, being possible against Bahamondes, who's got great great get-ups, great takedown defense, and incredible striking. Moving on up the card, main card opener. Couldn't pick a better guy to kick off your main card than Terrence McKinney taking on Kyle Nelson. T-Rex, he's the man. You look at this dude, we'll tap on him. We'll look at this dude's fight record real quick. Just see if you see a bit of a trend here. Round 1, 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 round 2, round 2, round 1, round 1, round 1. As you can see, I don't think this dude has gone to decision since, an amateur bout against Jorge Alcala in 2017. He's just an absolute animal. The dude hardly fights out of round 1. He's lost a lot, don't get me wrong. But dude has a perfect finishing rate right now inside the UFC octagon. Literally 100% of his wins are by finish, 47% by knockout, 53% by submission. So he does a little bit of both. Like I said, does lose a lot, leaves his chin up a lot, has found himself in bad positions for chokes a lot. Most recently in his last fight was choked out by Chris Duncan in a fight where it looked like he could have honestly had Duncan out of there, who's a super, super tricky, tough opponent. But then before that, nice win by guillotine over Vyacheslav Borshev, nice knockout win versus Damir Hadzovic, a loss to Esteban Ribovic, who I think is still, in my opinion, one of the best prospects at 155 pounds inside the UFC. And then before that, a knockout win over Brendan Marotte. He's taken on Kyle Nelson, who's 4-1 in his last 5, with wins over Blake Bilder, Fernando Padilla, Bill Algeo, and Matt Frivola, with his last loss coming 1 year, 6 months ago to Steve Garcia, in the middle of Garcia's knockout streak, where he was on an absolute run. Still is on a run. He's fighting at the UFC White House against Diego Lopez, which is incredible. This is going to be an interesting fight. If this fight gets outside of the first round, Kyle Nelson is almost surely going to win. But, dude, the first round finishing potential of Terrence McKinney is legit scary. He's the younger fighter here. He's a tad bit shorter, but has the reach advantage. The striking is incredible. The Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is great. I'm going to lean with Terrence McKinney here. If you take Terrence McKinney, you see minus 140 on the money line. If you want to try to take his KO or his submission, it's probably going to be minus 130. Like, if you want to take a double chance KO submission, the chance that Terrence McKinney actually goes to the cards is basically 0, because he's either going to finish Kyle Nelson in the first round or he's going to gas himself out and get finished by Kyle Nelson, who is a very respectable finisher inside the UFC. Both these guys are fairly similar. Kyle Nelson just has a little bit of a fight IQ edge, where Terrence McKinney definitely has a little bit of a finishing edge. I'm going to lean with Terrence McKinney, but this fight's going to be absolute fireworks. Definitely one of the best ones on the entire card, and surely will be a banger. Moving on up, we've got Mansur Abdulmalik versus Yusri Belgarwi. This is, one of my first underdog picks of the night. I'm not sure if those odds still hold true. Let's double check the odds real quick. Yeah, it's looking like he's floating between plus 105 and plus 124. So yeah, I'm gonna be leaning with Yusri Belgarwi here. I honestly thought he'd be a little bit of a wider underdog, but I still love him nonetheless. 4-fight win streak. A lot of these fights outside the UFC, but won his Contender Series fight by knockout 1 year 6 months ago, and then a nice knockout win over Azamat Bukhaev in his UFC debut 5 months ago. He's taking on Mansur Abdulmalik, who has ran through everybody he's fought inside the UFC octagon. He's 3-0-1 with a draw against Cody Brundage. That was, a super sloppy fight, but his wins are knockout win over Dusko Todorovic, knockout win over Nick Klein, then most recently a submission win by a standing guillotine choke against Antonio Tricoli. He's not going to have, a size advantage here, as Belgarwi is going to be 4 inches taller than him. He's going to have, Belgarwi's going to have a tad bit of a reach disadvantage, 79-inch reach compared to Mansur Abdulmalik's 80-inch reach. But Yusri Belgarwi, a Dutch kickboxing legend. This dude's fought Alex Pereira. He now trains with Alex Pereira at Teixeira MMA with Plinio Cruz, Glover Teixeira. This is a dude that I think is actually very legit and is going to be a ranked middleweight inside the UFC. I think Mansur Abdulmalik has potential to be a ranked middleweight someday, but he fights just too sloppy. That fight against Cody Brundage has so many red flags about it. It was a horrible fight. I know a lot of people, who were watching that fight were talking about how bad Mansur Abdulmalik looked at times against Cody Brundage, a guy who he should have, in theory, been able to run through pretty quickly in the first round. So, considering he's not going to have a massive size and reach advantage here, and he's fighting a guy who is a Dutch kickboxing legend, some of the best kickboxing probably in the UFC instantly, in Yusri Belgarwi. I'm going to have to lean with Belgarwi here to either win by knockout or by decision. I don't think Mansur Abdulmalik is going to be able to technically set up the strikes that would be able to put Yusri Belgarwi out. And I think that, Yusri being such a technical guy, having such a long history of kickboxing, I think it's going to be something that really is going to be a problem for Mansur Abdulmalik. So I'm going to lean Yusri Belgarwi here by decision or KO. Going to move on up the card. It was one of my first big underdog picks of the fight, or of the whole card. Moving on, we got Julian Erosa versus Larian Douglas. Larian Douglas making his UFC debut, coming off of a Contender Series knockout against Cam Teague 6 months ago. He's taking on Julian Erosa, who's 3-2 in his last 5. Last 2 losses to Fernando Padilla, and then most recently Melquizael Costa, who's on an absolute run. They put on a fight of the night performance and a great unanimous decision win for Melquizael Costa that helped him get set up for a big fight against Dan Ige, and now an even bigger fight against Arnold Allen here in a couple months. In that time, 3 wins against Ricardo Ramos, Christian Rodriguez, and Darren Elkins, with all 3 of those coming by finish. Julian is a guy that is actively looking for a finish a lot. He is a Washington native, so fighting very close to his hometown, and definitely a live dog in this fight. He's fighting out of Extreme Couture around some of the best coaches and training partners in the UFC. But he's taking on a guy in Larian Douglas who I think is very, very, very legit. Larian is going to have a height and reach disadvantage in this fight, but the power, I think, is definitely on the side of Douglas. This dude just throws to take your head off. And if you go back and you watch his fight against Cam Teague on the Dana White Contender Series, you will be able to see that very quickly, that his punches have very ill intent. He's not going out there to poke and tap and win a fight by decision. He is going out there to spin your chin as quickly as possible and get the knockout finish. So I'm going to lean with Larian Douglas here. I do think Julian Erosa is always a live dog. It certainly is a tricky opponent for Larian Douglas, being that he's going to be the smaller fighter here, fighting a guy with 43 professional fights on his record, tons of fights inside the UFC against top level opponents, a lot of finish wins against UFC competition. But I think the matchmakers know what they're doing here. And I think this is, a solid fight for Larry and Douglas to be able to sort of show off that finishing ability. Both of these guys are going to go out there trying to take each other's heads off, and it's sort of destined to be a good fight. I don't see this being one of those fights where you have two finishers going at it and it being a stalemate. No, I think both these guys are going to go out there to finish this fight. So I'm going to lean with Larry and Douglas by knockout, and we're going to move on up the card. Michael Chiesa versus Nico Price. This fight should probably be swapped with Ricky Simon versus Adrian Yanez, which is the second prelim fight of the night, but we'll leave it be. Michael Chiesa is from Spokane Valley, Washington, so it makes sense as to why he wants to fight on this card. I don't know how many fights this dude's got left inside the UFC. This could very well be it for him, especially with a win. With a win, he will be on a 4-fight win streak. His last 3 wins are against Tony Ferguson 1 year, 7 months ago, Max Griffin, and then most recently Court McGee. He's taking on Nico Price, who's 1-4 in his last 5. Got knocked out by Robbie Lawler in Lawler's sort of retirement fight 2 years, 8 months ago. His only win in his last 5 is against Alex Moreno by unanimous decision, and then most recently a 3-fight losing streak to Timber Garimbo, Jacoby Smith, and Nikolai Veretinnikov. Nico Price is the younger fighter here. Is a tad bit shorter, but has a half-inch reach advantage. This is a tough one to pick because Chiesa's good. Ultimate Fighter alum, 3-fight win streak. Massive favorite here. He's fighting at home. If he wins, he very well could put the gloves down on a 4-fight win streak inside the UFC octagon. Winning at home, probably in front of a lot of friends and family. Nico Price, on the other hand, is likely 1 loss away from getting cut by the UFC, which could also, effectively end his career. So I think there's probably some live dog aspect of plus 375 here on Nico Price. Am I going to take Nico Price? No. I'm going to lean with Michael Chiesa here, but I'm definitely going to be cautious. It's certainly not going to be a fight that I put money on if Michael Chiesa is floating as a minus 500 favorite. In no world should he be a minus 500 favorite in this fight. It's just a lot of recency bias considering Price is 1-4 in his last 5. So, gonna lean with Chiesa, but that's about all I have to say about that fight. Which brings us to the co-main event. Alexa Grasso versus Macy Barber. This is an interesting one. Macy Barber, 5-0 in her last 5. Wins against Jessica Ai by decision, Andrea Lee by split decision, Amanda Ribas by KO, Catalin Saramanara by unanimous decision, and then most recently Karine Silva by unanimous decision 3 months ago in a fight that I think was very close. She's taking on Alexa Grasso, former UFC champion at 125 pounds. Alexa 2-1 in her last 5. Wins over Vivian Araujo, Valentina Shevchenko, then the draw with Shevchenko, and then lost to Shevchenko. So a trilogy fight with Shevchenko in her last 5. It's crazy. She's fighting literally the best women's fighter, some would say of all time, in Shevchenko. And then most recently, she lost her last fight to Natalia Silva, who very well could be next for the title shot. I think I'm going to have to lean with Alexa Grasso here at underdog value. Her and Macy Barber, the same height. Grasso's got a little bit of a reach advantage. Barber certainly has the power advantage, the striking advantage, but Alexa Grasso is a top-level grappler. It's what won her the belt against Shevchenko. It's what kept her in that second fight against Shevchenko. And I think she's kind of underrated here just because she lost her last fight to Natalia Silva, who I think is going to be the toughest challenge for Valentina Shevchenko since she fought Alexa Grasso for the first time. I feel like Shevchenko was always going to beat Zhang Weili. As sad as that may be, Zhang is a legend. She's definitely going to be back. But I always sort of thought that was a fight for Shevchenko, and so I didn't really think that was a big issue for her, and I think Natalia Silva could cause a lot more issues. But yeah, I'm going to lean with Alexa Grasso here. I think just because of the grappling advantage. Macy Barber has good wrestling, don't get me wrong, but her get-ups are a little shaky at times. She struggled as being held down in the past. She is 5 years younger than Alexa Grasso, but Grasso, I think, you look at the fighters that Macy Barber has fought, you look at the fighters Alexa Grasso has fought, I almost weigh a 2-2-1 last 5 for Grasso higher than I rank a 5-0 for Macy Barber in her last 5, especially with how close that Karine Silva fight was last time out. I'm going to lean with Grasso here. Am I going to go super heavy on it? No. But, yeah, that's going to be my pick for this week is Alexa Grasso. Moving on up the card, we've got Israel Adesanya versus Joe Pyfer in the main event. The one, we've sort of all been waiting for. This is, a horrifying fight for the style bender. Israel Adesanya. Joe Pyfer has crazy power. His striking is ridiculous. Has decent wrestling. Not that that's going to probably come into play in this fight. This is almost certainly going to be a striking match between Adesanya and Pyfer. I just don't know who to pick here. This is one of those moments where my mind is telling me you should probably take Joe Pyfer. He's on a 3-fight win streak against decent opponents. Knockout win over Marc-Andre Barriault, a decision win over Kelvin Gastelum, and then most recently a submission win over Abus Magomedov, which is very impressive considering, Magomedov has a strong grappling game with a lot of submission wins of his own. And then before that, beat Abdul Razak Al Hassan by submission 2 years, 5 months ago, his last fight. Being a unanimous decision loss to Jack Hermanson. This is sort of the first big jump for Joe Pyfer to break into the top 10, close to top 5 at middleweight. And he's going to be taking on, one of the toughest strikers in UFC history, in Israel Adesanya. Izzy's going to be the bigger fighter here, and I think that's a big, big advantage for him. A 2-inch height advantage and a 5-inch reach advantage is going to be big. If he can keep Pyfer at range, do what Izzy does best, keep guys away from him, dance inside the pocket, pop outside the pocket, dance inside the pocket, pop outside the pocket. It very, very well should be Adesanya's fight. Adesanya has always respected the power that's come back at him. It has come back to bite him in the past, obviously knockout losses to guys like Poatan, and, recently Nasruddin Imavov. It's the power coming back at him has bit Izzy in the past, but he has always been one to sort of respect the power and understand what's coming back at him, and I think he knows this fight that, Pyfer is a one-punch type of guy, and he can't let his chin get tapped by Pyfer too many times, or else it's going to be, Pyfer's fight. Izzy's sort of got his back up against the wall here on a 3-fight losing streak to, Sean Strickland, Dricus du Plessis, and Nasruddin Imavov in his last 3 fights. Granted, like I said, these are 3 of the 4 best middleweights in the world right now that he's lost to. His last win is against who some would consider arguably the best mixed martial artist of all time, and Alex Pereira. He literally knocked out Poatan. Yes, this was at 185 pounds. Poatan was incredibly, compromised considering the amount of weight he had to cut, as he's now getting ready to fight for the heavyweight title here in a couple months, which is ridiculous. But I don't know. I think with the backup against the wall for Izzy, I just see a bounce back win here. I really do. I think a lot of people are on the side of Pyfer. That's why these odds are so close. And a lot of people are respecting the power and probably taking Pyfer by KO. But I think Adesanya has just as good of a chance as knocking out Joe Pyfer as Pyfer does knocking out Adesanya. And so I'm going to take Izzy to win this fight by KO or a decision. I have to trust my gut here. I know, my mind was telling me earlier this week probably take Joe Pyfer, but I gotta lean with the heart here and take Israel Adesanya and just throw a couple things out the window. Am I gonna go heavy on Adesanya? No, but I do think there is some value here. I think back up against the wall, 3-fight losing streak. It's time for Izzy to get a nice bounce back W, and I think Joe Pyfer is one that he could get it against. So we're gonna take Adesanya to win this fight by KO decision. And now we are going to craft some parlays for the week. So starting us off, we're going to get a 3-leg parlay going. We're going to go with Ricky Simon, Navajo Sterling, and Ignacio Bahamondes. 3-leg parlay, I'm going to flash that one up on the screen. And then we are going to take a fun parlay of Terrence McKinney in round 1, Yusri Belgarwi, and Larian Douglas by KO. 3-leg parlay. That's going to be an interesting one. Probably some good juice there on that one. And then for fun, trying to think of one that I can craft right here. Those were the two that I thought about before the video. I'm trying to think of one I can craft real quick off the top of my head. Maybe we'll take Tyrell Fortune moneyline. Tyrell Fortune moneyline, Alexa Grasso moneyline, Israel Adesanya moneyline. Just for fun. Keep that one light. You're going to get great odds there on that. Probably a 3-leg parlay is probably going to float you anywhere from 400 to 550 there. So I'm going to flash those 3 up on the screen. As always, I would recommend just taking every pick that I had on the prelims, every pick that I had on the main card, and doing 2 separate parlays, a prelim parlay, a main card parlay. I've done pretty solid recently. Last week swept the prelims, so if you... Actually, I swept the prelims on verdict, but my official pick on the video last week was Shamrock, so I actually went 6-1 on prelims last week, but sort of changed my mind last minute there, which I know I probably shouldn't be doing considering I already, put out a video with Shamrock as my official pick, but I did change my mind last minute and took El Sawadi, so... With that, I ended up going 7-0 on the prelims last week, but that's always something that I'd suggest, a little prelim parlay and main card parlay, just for fun. But I'm going to flash those parlays up on the screen. As always, thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, leave a like, comment, subscribe. It helps, it keeps me wanting to do this to see at least a decent amount of people coming back watching these every week, getting a look at my picks. If you have opposing opinions, if you agree with picks, leave a comment down below. I'll always reply, so I would love to go back and forth with you guys about sort of UFC, anything UFC. I love this stuff, love talking about it, and I think having conversations about it just helps improve my knowledge of the sport. So leave a comment if you've seen this video. If you agree or disagree with some picks, let me know. But again, thank you all for watching. I'll see you all next week. I want to say, who do we have next week? Let's see a double check real quick. I will see you all next week for Renato Moicano versus Chris Duncan. So yes, very interesting fight. Very, very interesting fight. And the day before, or same day, PFL Pittsburgh with Johnny Eblin and Brian Battle. So maybe I'll break both of those down next week's video. So thank you again, guys, and I'll see y'all next week. Peace.